Record on this. Hello, afternoon, everyone. I've got Alex Battison here with me today. He's the deputy head at Lord Wandsworth College. He's very kindly offered to share some advice with us on difficult conversations when at our conference this year, and also in questionnaires we've done. This is one of the areas that directors of sport really feel that they could do with some advice and help with. So, Alex, thanks very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. So I think if we just start off, what sort of strategies do you use when you have difficult conversations?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and hi everybody. So yeah, I think I've got a little bit of a mantra with any sort of feedback. I think that it needs to be specific, honest, and kind.
Yeah,
And I think difficult conversations can sometimes involve or be termed as feedback.
yeah,
And so I think when we're having those difficult conversations, uh, just an ownership of our emotion.
yeah,
Um, because I think sometimes that's what makes the most of the time I think the conversation difficult,
yeah,
emotion from one side or both sides. Yeah, a clear, specific point that we want to get across, honestly putting that point across, and I think thinking about context in that conversation is always good. So the person that we're speaking to, the particular issue at hand, and I think that kind of nuances the way in which that honesty is delivered,
yeah,
and then delivering it kindly. So
yeah,
always landing it kindly, not letting the kindness get in the way of the message most of the time. I think is a really good strategy, because sometimes if we're too kind, we don't actually have that difficult conversation. So I think it is kind to have those difficult conversations. They need to happen. They are difficult. That's the nature of them. But yeah, being specific, honest, and kind, having that in our minds, I think is something I find useful.
And where would you have these conversations, Alex? How would what would you do to prepare, and where would you have them?
Sure. So I'd always prefer to have a difficult conversation face to face.
Yeah,
I think certainly email, is probably much more for sort of disseminating information rather than for discussing something. And certainly if there is emotion involved, if something is delicate or or sensitive in any way, then certainly the kindness of
mm,
that specific, honest and kind piece, I think, can be enhanced face to face. So I think definitely in person, at a minimum on the phone, depending again on context.
yeah,
Um, and then in terms of preparing for them, I think giving ourselves a little bit of time
yeah,
before having those conversations is useful. And of course, and I'm sure, yeah, nothing I'm saying today will necessarily be completely new to people, but spending that little bit of time to compose ourselves. What is the specific message that I want to get across? Am I prepared to compromise in some way, shape, or form here? What might that look like? Um, if I hold this line, if I compromise, what are the sort of lifelong effects of that? What's the fallout from that? Who else might it affect? It's almost like a little bit of a diagram that if I'm actually having a difficult conversation that is making a change perhaps, or laying down a marker, or just having a think about the effects of that conversation and that decision. Thinking about whether anyone else will need to know. So there's the sort of management piece, I suppose. Will anyone else need to know about the conversation I'm having? Who needs to know about that? Does anyone need to know about it in advance without over-promising anything? Um, and then just thinking, yeah, sort of post-conversation, taking a little bit of time to think how the conversation went, whether or not we need to follow up in writing with that conversation to sort of really make things clear. And I suppose that's something that actually can be missed quite a lot, and I'm not sure we need to do it all the time. But if there's particularly for some really important stuff, I think we need to affirm what we've said in writing. So
Mm.
we've got that down. We agreed. Thanks so much. We agreed this. Um, you know, Please let me know if I was in the same conversation. That this is what I think I spoke to you about, and let me know if that's not correct. I think that works well as well.
I think the taking time thing's really important, is it? Because a lot of the time in difficult conversations, emotions are involved, and I think it can be very difficult to listen if you are emotional. So, in the sport world, we talk, a lot of us will have read The Chimp Paradox by Steve Peters. And he would say, if my brain is in chimp mode and your brain is in chimp mode, then neither of us is listening to the other person and the conversation's not worth having. So I think that time is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, and Chris, I'd come in there briefly. It's a really good point. I think listening is without doubt the most important
Yeah.
aspect of communication. I think maintaining eye contact. A colleague was going through some communication training the other day, and specifically listening, and mentioned to me the position of the tongue on the mouth, and that
Mhm.
if our tongue is against the roof of our mouth,
Yeah.
then that shows that we're really attuned to what's going on.
Yeah.
And if the tongue drops towards the bottom of our mouth, it's because we're wanting to talk
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
want to speak. And so we've got that kind of just pausing, just actually, and sometimes in these difficult conversations, people actually just want to sound off.
Mm.
And sometimes it's just about listening, isn't it? So listening is really important. It's a really good point.
That's a really good tip, actually. I was just trying it there because I think a lot of us, directors of sport especially, do talk a lot. And I think listening is a really important skill. Somebody said to me about these: seek first to understand and then to be understood. There are two different perceptions of the same reality here, aren't there? And sometimes it is important to listen, and understand the other person's viewpoint.
Yeah, I'd say always. I think if you know, I think our influence increases in life, and we would always want to use that influence, um, in a way that displays integrity. We wouldn't want
Mm.
to take advantage of situations, and our influence increases when we form an emotional connection to somebody,
Yeah,
and we form that emotional connection through them feeling welcome in the room,
yeah,
through their sense of belonging for being here, through us
mm,
showing real interest.
yeah,
If we are interested in someone else, that automatically
yeah,
creates a little bit of a connection, doesn't it? And the more connection we can create, the more influence we can garner. And I think people are pretty good at thankfully sort of seeing through people these days. And so I think if we approach the situation with integrity, keeping in the vast majority of cases, I'm sure the young person at the centre of the conversation, but certainly showing a broad understanding for what's right and wrong, then I think people will more often than not be able to see where you're coming from at least.
yeah. I would agree completely. If you can make the environment safe, um, psychological safety is another thing we talk about. There has to be mutual respect, isn't there? And there has to be a mutual purpose here. Again, to take a sporting analogy, we're going for the ball, not the player. It's not a personal thing, is it? It's an action or a decision that, sometimes even you might not like. But if, I'm a director of sport and you're my line manager or my headmaster, ultimately you are my boss, and I sometimes need to listen and understand the place that it's coming from your point of view, and then go back to my department and explain it. I think that's important as well, to have that mutual respect and have that safe environment where both people feel they can be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And two things that have cropped up for me there with what you said, Chris. I think not taking things personally,
Yeah,
that can be really difficult, and
yeah,
that's certainly something that I found difficult in my career.
yeah,
when I've made another mistake,
Mm.
got something else wrong, and getting quite down on myself or what have you, but actually not taking feedback personally, not taking
Yeah.
a parent perspective personally,
Yeah.
particularly if we think it's unreasonable, and particularly as we all know that our first sort of port of call will not to be defensive. So I think that's really important as well. We back ourselves to be really open to feedback. I'm sure as the
Yeah.
professionals that we are, to be open to other people's perspectives. In there comes listening, as we've just been discussing, as really key, and with no defensiveness. This isn't about us. This isn't about a personal thing. It can never be.
Yeah.
It's about practice. It's about the situation. It's about systems, whatever.
Yeah.
And actually, boss in the previous school, Elizabeth, she spoke to me. She always used to say, "Look, if anyone is being unreasonable with you at any point, then actually the advice she gave to me was that she had found it useful in her career to just think about, oh wow, like that is really unreasonable. Not to say this out loud, but to think it. And that is really unreasonable. Like I wonder what is going on for you at the moment,
Yeah.
because what you're doing is unreasonable. I might be finding it unreasonable or rude or abusive, whatever, um, heated. But if there's any sense of unreasonableness there, I reckon 99 times out of 100 there is something going on for that person. And that happens to us all in life, doesn't it? Like, and we talked about emotions at the beginning, and I've sort of taken comfort from using that, just as a reflective tool in my own mind, like just try and get a little bit of sympathy for that other person. This isn't about me. Like, what's
Yeah.
going on with this other person? This is unreasonable.
Yeah.
I'm actually now going to start feeling sorry for them.
Yeah.
And crikey, I hope you're okay.
Yeah.
And again, not verbalizing that, although maybe asking if someone's okay
Yeah.
at certain points is absolutely the right thing to do. But just as a personal coping mechanism, I think when some difficult conversations are particularly difficult.
No, I think that's right. I think sometimes we make assumptions, or it can be easy to make an assumption about that person's intent, or they made you feel this, and their intention was never to do that. And I think someone said to me once, when you're having this conversation, if you use the word I rather than you, it sort of takes away the blame, if you like. You're not trying to blame the person. You say, I felt, or I don't understand, or I would like to understand where you're coming from. Whereas sometimes if you say, you made me feel really bad, that again brings emotion into it. And I think you're right. Sometimes we do make assumptions about the other person's intentions, and we don't know what's going on in their home life or in any part of their life. They may have, their baby might have been up till 3 o'clock in the morning. They might have had a row with their partner. Maybe, one of their family members is ill. All these things make, people emotional and sometimes make poor decisions. But you're right. If we're kind and compassionate first, rather than jumping in both feet first, that makes a lot of difference.
And I think absolutely, and I think if there is an opportunity in a particularly heated, difficult conversation, or not, frankly, whatever colleagues would feel is appropriate. But if there is an opportunity to apologise,
Yes.
we've talked about it. Nothing being personal. Our egos, as difficult as it can be to remove that personal element, our ego shouldn't be a part of these conversations at all, and it can be so disarming just to apologise.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry that we're at this point. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
start the meeting by saying that I'm I'm
Yeah.
I'm, I'm here to help. I'm here to listen,
Yeah.
and just sort of calmly lay out at the start of any conversation, if it's of that nature, with a parent, for example, that look, we're a team around your young person, and let's work together on this. And I'm really sorry if we've got this wrong, and believe me, I will want to work on this really hard to do right for your young person. and having that humility, having that lack of ego, lack of entitlement, being really grounded and being really authentic with that. Not being afraid to, show vulnerability,
Yeah.
um, not being afraid to put our hands up and say, like, crikey, we could have done better for you there.
Yeah.
This is a bit below our standards. I'm really sorry about that. Not only is that the right thing to do, but again, emotional connection that brings people closer to us, I think, and is disarming and in my experience, sort of brings people on side of it.
And I think for me, that goes back to the time element because if I give myself time before this conversation, and normally that would be the next day, ideally, I've now calmed down. I've realized that, I need to go into this conversation rationally and not emotionally. And I think if you do admit mistakes, show vulnerability, apologize if you've done something wrong, if that's at the beginning of the conversation tends to go a lot easier than if, both, chimps are butting heads straight away.
Yeah. And it's I know colleagues will know this, but it's like it's absolutely fine to get stuff wrong. Like
Yeah.
we do that all the time as human beings, don't we? So, I wonder whether there are individuals who are in our teams who are new to the profession. Maybe they're wanting to make a really good impression or what have you. Chris, you talked about psychological safety earlier. I think it's really important for us to have those discussions with our people and just be like, look, I trust you to make decisions. Please ask me questions, but please also make decisions and get on with stuff. If you make a mistake, like, you're a human being.
Yeah.
Come and talk to me about it. Like, let's fail fast and learn fast and then fix fast. Let's fix it and let's get on with it. But yeah, just I suppose not letting, with some colleagues perhaps, not letting their desire to do a great job or perfectionism creeping in or anything that ultimately isn't healthy. Trying to put that to bed with before anyone starts in the role, getting that environment right.
We've covered a few of these already, but one of my other questions was about, do you have any golden rules or tools? So you talked about, putting your tongue in the roof of your mouth to
Yeah.
listen. I talked about, using I. Do you have any other, golden rules or tools that, you've agreed in your own head beforehand that you're going to use in these conversations?
I think some general ones and then probably some specific ones. Thinking about where any meeting takes place, I think is important. Where if it's in person, so in the office I'm in now, which as you can see is highly organised and thoroughly tidy. Got my staff football kit up here for later on. But like if it's in here, then how does the person feel about coming in here for that conversation? The location of meetings is an interesting factor, I think. Time of day, time
Yeah,
of term. Actually, is it worth waiting until after half term when someone's a bit fresher?
yeah,
Um, I think a difficult conversation that is bad news, having that, in private, praising publicly,
yeah,
pulling people up in private, I think is a good rule of thumb. Um, the possibility of a difficult conversation done walking with someone,
yeah,
because some of the difficulty sometimes with having conversations about difficult stuff, particularly if it's sensitive, is the eye contact piece. And actually sometimes walking or speaking as a dad now in the car when I'm driving or something, sometimes that can be a great place to open up a conversation that's a little bit more tricky. And so sort of thinking about the context and the setting, the environment that the conversation takes place in, I think is really important. The preparation for it, and again, crikey, we're all rushed off our feet, aren't we? Running around. So I'm not suggesting unrealistically taking a long time to do this. and making sure that, between meetings, we do have a few minutes to prepare for the next one. And that goes for the same, don't book this difficult conversation, the minute after the department meeting or the minute after coming off the netball court, or what have you. Make sure that there is that little bit of time to get our own composure and think about ourselves, and when that difficult conversation happens. In terms of the preparation, thinking about the content, the message that we have to get across by the end of the conversation. What we want, kind of working backwards. What does a great outcome from this conversation look like? And therefore, what are the key points I want to get out there? Is there any hugging to do in here? Is there an apology I can put out there? Is there some positive stuff that I can balance this difficult conversation up with? There's the sort of old trick of asking someone to sort of self-reflect first. And at the end of the day, they want to and deserve to hear the truth from us. Yeah. As I said, delivered in a specific, honest, and kind way. Mm. So I think all of those general things, also with the possibility of, as I think I said earlier in our time together, Chris, of writing things up afterwards, and whether that's writing things up in a notebook, and passing it to someone else, maybe another member of the team in HR, the people team, or line manager, or just sort of noting it down, in our own notebook, and just sort of thinking how things develop from there. So I think those are general things. And then in terms of specific stakeholders, obviously if we're talking to our bursars or what have you, that sort of a key sort of grasp of the financials. I suppose that comes into the content. If we're speaking to a line manager who might have other responsibilities in the school as well, absolutely standing up for our corner and cheerleading our team and our corner, but also showing that we can be reasonable by trying to understand the other factors at play for the person that we're speaking to. So actually, if you're talking to the head, she or he is going to have a really broad view of the school. How can you show an appreciation for that in some way, shape, or form, without just sort of being so blinkered that it's our way or the highway here, and how can we be the reasonable people that we are, and sort of crucially sound like that in practice. With parents, I think having an understanding about what's going on for them as parents as best we can, what's going on for their child, more generally. Why might they be really cross about sports session X? Because actually I've kind of looked into it informally and there really doesn't seem to be anything wrong here. Is there anything going on? Does the house parent or head of year or tutor know anything about that? So going into those meetings being forearmed if they're difficult. Going into those meetings, I think critically some people would get in contact with me and say, oh look, Alex, can I come and see you? And I would 9 times out of 10 say, absolutely, of course. And could you give me a steer about what it's about? And I think asking that question might seem obvious, but I think it's important because that allows me to prepare properly for it. And actually there might be some times when a staff member says, actually, no, I'd rather not say over email, in which case, yeah, sure, no problem, rock up. Or a parent will say, yeah, I want to talk to you about the issue that my daughter's having with staff member X, in which case that gives me a little bit of sort of notice. And I think, not being scared to say, look, I need at least a day, I'm a busy person. Of course, I'll see you at next available opportunity. How about Thursday, in 2 days' time or something? So yeah, a collection of things there, Chris.
Yeah, brilliant. I've actually written down here, I was going to say the same thing. Walking meetings can be really good, can't they? To, just calm down, particularly, you're outside, and the eye contact thing I think is really important there with the walk-in meetings. And also the time I used to write in my calendar 10 days before the end of every term, end of term, exclamation mark, just because people are tired, might
Yeah,
make rash decisions, and just to understand that concept. And then I think the last thing I'd say on the meeting is always at the end, thank people for, taking the time, whether you've called the meeting or them.
yeah,
It is important, again, from the kindness and the compassion point of view, to thank them for, what obviously has been a difficult conversation, but for taking the time out. Just to
yeah.
finish then, Alex, have you got any specific example, or not example, sorry, pieces of advice for directors of sport in their roles, about how they would maybe deliver difficult conversations to their own staff members, to parents, or to SLT? Can you think of any specific pieces of advice for directors of sport?
Okay, so having a general approach of knowing and loving your people
Mm,
is really important. Um, Knowing who you're speaking to, having an appreciation as best you can for who you're speaking to, always doing that in a compassionate way. There is never an excuse not to.
yeah.
And Jacinda Ardern, ex-Prime Minister of New Zealand, has a wonderful quote which I'm going to mess up here, but I think as a Prime Minister, she was, always told, look, you've got to be tough, and you've got to be this, and you've got to be that, and she was just sort of questioning, who says that tough can't be kind, So I just think that's a brilliant message. Always lead with compassion, always specific, honest, and kind feedback. Always know and love your people. Always prepare for a difficult conversation. Your people deserve that. Anyone you're speaking to deserves that. They deserve the best from you. They deserve you to walk into that meeting prepared. Um, have an understanding about what you want the outcome to be. And I think crucially, maybe something I haven't mentioned, Chris, is working with people over time. I suppose particularly staff members. Make sure that nothing you're saying, I think, unless it's a one-off, things shouldn't be a surprise for people. So when it gets to an appraisal for someone I'm line managing, a piece of feedback for them, I don't want it to be surprising, because I've talked to them, I've sidled up next to them, I've had that conversation about the email that was sent to the other head of cricket. I've had that conversation with them beforehand, and so when it comes to the appraisal meeting, for example, and there are a few of these little things, we're agreeing that this is a target, and it's not new news. I think that's important too, and we have a duty to have these specific, honest, and kind conversations with our people routinely. Otherwise, we are not fulfilling that privilege of being a line manager to them. We've got to have them. We can't shy away from them. Otherwise, we're doing them a disservice. And I think that would be my message in summary.
That's brilliant. I really appreciate your time today. That's going to be great for directors of sport, those bits of advice. So thank you very much, Alex. Really appreciate it.
Oh, no worries, Chris. Yeah, thanks for everyone for putting up with me. Appreciate it. I hope it was useful.